The young police officer's voice echoes across the crowded supermarket parking lot as he aims his service weapon at the elderly black man's chest. "I don't care what kind of fake badge you're flashing. Old man, get on the ground now." 82-year-old FBI Special Agent Harold Washington slowly raises his weathered hands, his Purple Heart lapel pin catching the afternoon sunlight, while dozens of shocked shoppers pull out their phones to record what they think is just another case of police brutality, completely unaware they're witnessing a decorated Korean War veteran being humiliated by the very system he spent 60 years protecting. If this story hits you in the gut like it should, smash that subscribe button, because we're bringing you the real stories of veterans who never got the recognition they deserved. Drop a comment below about a veteran in your life who deserves more respect. Let's honor them together. Now let me tell you what happened next, and trust me, you won't see this ending coming. Harold Washington had seen plenty of young cops in his 60 years with the FBI. Most were good people trying to do right by their communities. But Officer Derek Mills wasn't one of them. It started when Harold pulled into the supermarket parking lot that Tuesday afternoon. All he wanted was to grab some groceries for his wife Martha before heading home. At 82, Harold still worked part-time as a consultant for the Bureau, helping train new agents about old cases that never quite got solved. Harold parked his old Honda Civic and was walking toward the store entrance when he heard shouting from across the lot. A young white police officer was screaming at a teenage black kid who couldn't have been more than 16 years old. The kid had his hands up, tears streaming down his face, while the officer kept yelling about how he matched the description of someone who supposedly stole something from the store. But Harold could see what was really happening. This wasn't about any theft. This was about a cop who saw a young black kid and decided he was guilty of something. Harold walked over slowly, his FBI credentials already in his hand. He'd done this before. Sometimes all it took was another authority figure to calm things down and remind everyone that procedures mattered. Officer Mills was red-faced and sweating, his hand resting on his gun while he continued screaming at the teenager. The kid looked terrified, and a small crowd of shoppers had started to gather, most of them filming with their phones. Harold cleared his throat and spoke in the calm, steady voice he'd used in thousands of investigations over the decades. He told Officer Mills that he was FBI and suggested they all take a step back and figure out what was actually going on here. That's when everything went wrong. Officer Mills spun around and looked Harold up and down with pure disgust. He saw an elderly black man in simple clothes, and he made up his mind about what Harold was worth in about 2 seconds. Mills told Harold to mind his own business and keep walking, but Harold couldn't do that. The teenager was shaking now, and more people were gathering. This situation was about to get out of hand. Harold tried again, this time showing his FBI badge clearly. He explained that he just wanted to help defuse the situation before anyone got hurt. Officer Mills looked at the badge and started laughing. Not a friendly laugh, but the kind of laugh that made everyone around them uncomfortable. He told Harold that anyone could buy a fake FBI badge online these days, and he wasn't falling for it. The crowd was getting bigger now. At least 30 people were watching, and most of them had their phones out recording everything. Harold could hear people whispering, and he knew what they were thinking. Here was another case of police harassment. Another young black kid being terrorized for no good reason. Harold tried one more time to explain who he was. He told Officer Mills his name, his badge number, and suggested they could call the local FBI field office to verify his credentials. All Harold wanted was to help the teenager and get everyone to calm down. But Officer Mills wasn't interested in calming down. He was getting more aggressive by the minute, and Harold realized this young cop had probably been looking for a fight all day. Now he thought he had 2 targets instead of 1. Mills told Harold to shut up and back away, or he'd arrest him for interfering with police business. The crowd was getting restless now, and Harold could hear people starting to get angry. Some were shouting at the officer to leave the old man alone. Others were calling for someone to call the real police. That's when Officer Mills made the worst decision of his career. He drew his weapon and pointed it directly at Harold's chest. The entire parking lot went silent except for the sound of car engines and the clicking of phone cameras. Harold felt his heart skip a beat, but he kept his hands steady and his voice calm. In Korea, he'd had guns pointed at him by enemy soldiers, but this felt different. This felt wrong in a way that cut right through his soul. Mills was screaming, now, telling Harold to get on the ground immediately. He kept yelling about fake badges and how Harold needed to learn some respect. The young cop's hands were shaking, and Harold realized this situation could turn deadly in seconds. The teenager, who'd started all this, was crying openly now, begging Officer Mills not to shoot the old man. Some people in the crowd were screaming for Mills to put his gun down. Others were calling 911 on their phones. Harold slowly raised his hands higher, trying to show everyone that he wasn't a threat. But inside, he was thinking about Martha at home, waiting for him to bring back groceries. He was thinking about his grandchildren who would see this video on the internet if it went viral. And he was thinking about all the young agents he'd trained over the years, wondering if any of them would end up like Officer Mills. Mills kept screaming orders, telling Harold to get face down on the asphalt. The crowd was getting louder, with people shouting from all directions. Some were begging Mills to stop, Others were cursing at him. A few were trying to get the teenager to safety. Harold knew he had to do something before this escalated into violence. So he started talking to Officer Mills in the same calm voice he'd used to talk down armed suspects, angry witnesses, and scared victims over 6 decades of law enforcement. He told Mills that he understood the officer was doing his job, and that Harold respected that. He said he wasn't trying to cause trouble or interfere with police work. All he wanted was to help make sure everyone stayed safe. But Mills wasn't listening. He was too angry, too embarrassed by the crowd, and too convinced that Harold was trying to make him look stupid. The young cop's finger was on the trigger now, and Harold could see the rage in his eyes. That's when Harold heard the sound of squealing tires across the parking lot. A police cruiser came racing through the lot with its lights flashing, but no siren. It screeched to a stop just 20 feet away, and out stepped Police Chief Raymond Torres. Chief Torres was a 25-year veteran of the force, and Harold could tell immediately that he was the kind of cop who took his job seriously. Torres took one look at the scene, his officer pointing a gun at an elderly man surrounded by dozens of witnesses with cameras, and his face went dark with anger. Torres shouted at Mills to lower his weapon immediately, but Mills was too worked up to think straight. He started explaining to his chief about fake FBI badges and interfering civilians and how Harold was disrespecting police authority. Chief Torres wasn't interested in explanations. He ordered Mills to holster his weapon and step back. When Mills hesitated, Torres made it clear that this was not a request. Mills finally lowered his gun, but he kept arguing with his chief. He insisted that Harold was just some old guy trying to cause trouble, and that he'd handled the situation correctly. That's when Chief Torres walked over to Harold and asked to see his credentials. Harold handed over his FBI identification, and Torres examined it carefully. Then he made a phone call that lasted about 30 seconds. When he hung up, his face was even darker than before. Torres walked back to Officer Mills and told him that he'd just verified Harold's identity with the FBI field office. Harold Washington wasn't just any FBI agent. He was a decorated Korean War veteran with 60 years of federal law enforcement experience. He'd received commendations from 4 different FBI directors, and he was currently working as a senior consultant on cold cases. The color drained from Mills' face as Chief Torres continued talking. Torres explained that Mills had just drawn his weapon on a federal agent, who had more law enforcement experience than everyone else in their department combined. But Chief Torres wasn't finished. He told Mills that Harold Washington had also earned a Purple Heart in Korea after taking shrapnel while helping evacuate wounded soldiers. He'd been shot twice in the line of duty as an FBI agent and had solved more murder cases than most detectives see in their entire careers. The crowd was listening to every word now, and Harold could see the shame spreading across Officer Mills' face. The young cop was starting to realize just how badly he'd messed up. Chief Torres turned to address the crowd that had gathered, apologized publicly for his officer's behavior, and assured everyone that this incident would be investigated thoroughly. Then he did something that surprised everyone, including Harold. He asked Harold if he would be willing to accept a public apology from Officer Mills. Right there in the parking lot, Harold looked at the young cop, who was clearly humiliated and possibly about to lose his job. He thought about all the mistakes he'd made as a young man, all the second chances he'd been given, and all the good cops he'd worked with over the years, who'd learned from their errors. But then Harold looked at the teenager who'd started all this, still shaking from fear and trauma. He thought about how many other young people might face Officer Mills in the future if nothing changed. Harold told Chief Torres that he appreciated the offer, but that this wasn't really about him. It was about the young man who'd been terrorized. Before Harold even arrived, it was about a police officer who'd let prejudice cloud his judgment, and it was about making sure this never happened to anyone else. Chief Torres nodded and turned back to Officer Mills. In front of the entire crowd, he told Mills that he was suspended immediately pending a full internal investigation. He also informed Mills that the incident had been recorded by multiple witnesses and would be reviewed by the district attorney's office. Then Chief Torres did something else that surprised everyone. He removed Mills' badge and service weapon right there in the parking lot. He told Mills that he had 30 minutes to clean out his locker and turn in his equipment, because his career with their department was over. The crowd started murmuring as the reality of what they'd witnessed sank in. This wasn't just another case of police misconduct being swept under the rug. This was a police chief taking immediate action to hold his officer accountable. But Chief Torres wasn't done. He walked over to the teenager who'd been the original target of Mills' harassment and apologized personally. He assured the young man that he'd done nothing wrong, and that his department would be conducting additional training to prevent incidents like this in the future. Then Torres turned to Harold and asked if there was anything else the department could do to make this right. Harold thought for a moment, looking around at all the faces in the crowd. He saw people of all ages and backgrounds who'd witnessed something they'd never forget. Some looked angry. Others looked relieved. A few looked hopeful. Harold told Chief Torres that what he'd done today, holding his officer accountable immediately and publicly, was exactly what good law enforcement looked like. He said that Torres had restored some faith in the system. For everyone who'd witnessed the incident, as the crowd began to disperse, several people approached Harold to thank him for stepping in to help the teenager. Others wanted to shake his hand and hear about his military service. A few asked for selfies, which Harold politely declined. The teenager, whose name was Marcus, came over to thank Harold personally. He said he'd been walking to the store to buy birthday supplies for his little sister when Officer Mills stopped him for no reason. Marcus had been terrified that he was going to jail, or worse, until Harold showed up. Harold told Marcus that standing up for what's right sometimes means taking risks, but that's what good people do for each other. He gave Marcus his business card and told him to call if he ever needed help with anything. As Harold finally walked toward the store to buy his groceries, he reflected on what had just happened. In his 82 years, he'd seen plenty of injustice. He'd fought in a war, worked dangerous cases, and dealt with people at their worst and their best. But he'd also learned that change was possible when good people refused to stay silent. Chief Torres had shown that accountability mattered more than protecting bad cops. The crowd of witnesses had shown that communities could come together when someone needed help. And Harold had been reminded that his years of service, both in the military and in law enforcement, had prepared him for moments exactly like this one. When Harold got home that evening with Martha's groceries, he told her about his afternoon. Martha listened quietly, then hugged him tight and told him she was proud of him for doing the right thing, even when it put him in danger. Harold smiled and said that some things were worth the risk. Protecting people who couldn't protect themselves was what he'd spent his whole life doing. He wasn't about to stop now, even at 82 years old. The next morning, Harold's phone started ringing early. News outlets had picked up the story from the social media videos, and everyone wanted to interview the FBI agent who'd stood up to police misconduct. Harold declined most of the requests, but he did agree to one local television interview. During the interview, Harold was asked what he wanted people to take away from what had happened. He said that good law enforcement meant protecting everyone, regardless of their age, race, or background. He said that Chief Torres had shown real leadership by holding his officer accountable immediately, but most importantly, Harold said that change was possible when good people refused to accept injustice. He'd seen it in Korea, in his FBI career, and now in a supermarket parking lot at age 80-2. The story went viral within days. Not because of the confrontation, but because of Chief Torres' response and Harold's quiet dignity throughout the ordeal. Officer Mills never worked in law enforcement again, but Chief Torres used the incident to implement new training programs that became a model for other departments. Harold continued his consulting work with the FBI for 3 more years before finally retiring completely at age 8. He spent his remaining years speaking at police academies and community groups about the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. And every year on his birthday, Harold received a card from Marcus, the teenager he'd helped that day in the parking lot. Marcus went on to become a teacher, inspired by Harold's example of standing up for others even when it meant taking risks. Harold Washington passed away peacefully at age 91, surrounded by family and friends who remembered him not just as a war hero or a decorated FBI agent, but as a man who never stopped fighting for what was right, even when the fight came to him in the most unexpected places. At his funeral, Chief Torres gave a eulogy about the day he met Harold in that parking lot. He said that Harold had taught him that real courage wasn't about carrying a gun or wearing a badge. It was about doing the right thing even when you were scared, even when you were outnumbered, and even when no one would blame you for walking away. The lesson Harold Washington left behind was simple. Justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something you make happen, one choice at a time. No matter how old you are, or how many battles you've already fought, sometimes the most important fight of your life happens in the most ordinary place, when you least expect it, and when you have the most to lose by getting involved. Harold Washington understood that, and because he did, a lot of other people got to understand it too.